people who have encouraged, inspired, or challenged me in one way or another and bring them on to tell some of their story in hopes that it inspires you to tell some of yours. My name is Todd Nesloni, and I am the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership for TEPSA here in Texas. And I am so thrilled this week to bring you my friend, Sarah Plum. Sarah, tell everybody a little bit about who you are.
So I'm an ESOL teacher in Northern Virginia, but I've worn a lot of different hats over time. I was a classroom teacher for most of my career, second and third and fifth grade. But I also am an after-school administrator for a federal grant program for the last 5 years. So during the day, teacher, after-school administrator. So it's been like a very interesting transition. I have two boys, both that have special needs. So I also kind of have navigated that as well.
Right. Well, I want to, so there's two very different things I want to talk about. So the first I want to talk about is, already as educators, we have a hard time balancing things. And that's just with one mindset of a career. You're teaching during the day and then administering after school.
Yeah.
How do you balance everything?
It's very hard, and there's definitely a learning curve. I would say the most challenging piece of it for me has been to navigate the colleague relationship during the day and then the administrator relationship in the afternoon, because what I do as an administrator doesn't directly impact like evaluation or things like that. And I don't have the authority that an administrator during the day would. So I've had to really find ways to navigate those relationships. And I've had to be really, really intentional from the beginning about how I handle conflict, how I handle coaching staff. I still have to do observations and evaluations as a part of this federal program, but they don't count towards the school day. Right. So it's definitely very interesting. And at times it can be very challenging because I, of course, don't want to sour relationships where I have to collaborate with people during the school day. And it is very different than your normal administrator and teacher relationship where you can kind of have that power differential. Right. I still have to be equal even during after school.
Wow. I can't even imagine trying to balance both those and those relationships and then not having the full kind of thing that you have with the normal administrator. So, backing up a little bit even more, was education always something you wanted to be in?
No. So my story is kind of like a winding road. I started out, I was a debater in high school, which if you follow me on Instagram, that's probably not a shock to you that I was a policy debater in high school. And so I wanted to become a politician really and influence policy. And so I started off as a poli-sci international relations double major at JMU. But I had a really hard time that first semester traveling, doing debate, because I debated for the college team, and something just didn't feel right to me. And so I decided to leave after that first semester, do community college, because I wanted to kind of get a better sense of what I wanted out of my college experience and where I wanted to go in life before making that huge financial commitment. So I actually took art classes, believe it or not, and my next step was I ended up at an art school in New York City. I applied and interviewed at all the art schools in New York City for photography. I got into a bunch of them, and I ended up at the School of Visual Arts right in Midtown Manhattan. And that was a very interesting experience. And that's where I learned I do not like competition. I enjoy collaboration. It was very competitive, very cutthroat, very judgmental. And I didn't want my life to be that. And this whole time I have this nagging sense in the back of my mind that I enjoy learning above all. Right. I always have. And I enjoy sharing that with people. And so it just became this natural realization over time that what I really wanted to do was teach because I love to learn. And so I went back home, I finished out community college, and then I went on to get both my bachelor's and master's at the same time in elementary education at VCU. So in a
Wow.
sense, yes, I've always wanted to teach because I've always wanted to be a learner.
Yeah.
But at the same time, no, I took a very winding road to get here.
Now, what led you to working with ESOL students? And for
So
those who
our
don't know, what does that stand for?
so it's English speakers of other languages, and I actually really hate that acronym because
Mhm.
it it centers English, and I am a big believer in looking at our students' strengths. And so I
Mhm.
refer to it as teaching emerging multilingual students because some of our
Oh,
students are already bilingual in
yeah.
two languages other than English. And so I like to talk about the fact that, my goodness, they're going to be literate in two languages.
I
And
love
that's
that.
way more than I can say for myself. So I ended up doing it because our school really needed high quality teachers in that area because we have about 50% of our students, 50 to 60% of our students receive services, but 75% of our students at one point were identified as emerging multilinguals.
Wow.
So it just was natural. My classes tended to be 100% emerging multilingual in my first few years of teaching. And so I had to naturally acquire those skills that
Mhm.
a teacher would already have. And I actually didn't go through a credential program, I just took the test.
Wow.
So no classes, I just went in and took the test. I passed. And then the next year, I was an ESOL teacher, and then I went back into the classroom because they needed me to be a science teacher, and then now I'm ESOL again. So
Wow. Well, one thing that I love about you, Sarah, is that you are very much a fighting for all of our students, especially those who have traditionally been marginalized.
yeah.
When did that become a really big passion of yours?
Um, so I would say that in some sense, I've always been, not always, I would say probably midway through high school, I became really aware of my own privilege.
Mhm.
And I started to kind of change my own behavior. And when I saw things that I didn't feel were equitable, or I saw things that really needed to be called out, I
Mhm.
started to do that. And so through grad school, we had a pretty significant equity focus, and so that was my lens going into teaching. But what really brought it home was my experience of going into a school with students that are regularly marginalized
Mhm.
in multiple ways, and realizing, I have to use my privilege and my voice to dismantle that and make sure that all of these systems of inequities, don't stay for them. So I'd say it's really just one part awareness of my own privilege and one part situational and the experience of teaching students um, that have that lived experience. Yeah, so I mean, it's really more experiential than anything else.
Well, one thing I really appreciate you is you bring things to light in a way that makes people think. And I think sometimes in this day and age we live in today, some people can be very abrasive with trying to help broaden the thoughts of others. And I think everybody's trying to be better, but not everybody's ready to take some of the steps
Yeah.
to really identify their own privilege and their own things that they've been raised with that they don't even realize or biases they
Yeah.
have. And so, how do you walk that line of using your voice without feeling like you're being offensive? Because I know for me, sometimes when I stand up, then I start to feel like, well, I hurt their feelings, and it's like, but I'm standing up for what's right. So how do you navigate that?
So I'll say this has kind of been a transition for me. A lot of people, especially people of color, um, women, people in the LGBTQ community, for them, and speaking of someone that's a part of, the LGBTQ community, you just kind of, however it comes out is how it comes out.
Mhm.
And when you are in that experience, you cannot be worried about being nice or how things come across because in many cases you're literally fighting for your own survival. But
Mm.
what I've learned as being someone that's often on the outside of those situations, that's realizing my own privilege, that's trying to call people in, I have the privilege and capacity and space to approach it differently. You know,
Right.
I can take that time to move people incrementally. And for someone living it and having that lived experience, they don't have that capacity to do that necessarily
Mhm.
because they're dealing with the burden of the marginalization. So I always try and keep that in mind, that when I feel like something is too harsh or too offensive, that's my personal reaction to it, and it's probably rooted in my own privilege.
Ah,
And so I try and just take a step back and realize, what is the message that's coming across, and focus on the message. Because for me to start talking about tone or how people should say things, the message is the purpose,
right,
right? And if we always focus on how it's being received, we're really setting ourselves in that. So
right,
when it's a person that's talking about their lived experience, that's trying to move forward on equity and liberation in that respect, I don't even address it. I
right,
just look for the message. But for me, I have that space to take that time and move someone an inch rather than a mile.
right.
And that's privilege in and of itself. And I didn't
Mhm.
always used to be that way. I used to be super super abrasive, um in a way that like wasn't really my place to do that. And instead of passing the mic to people, I used to kind of for lack of a better term, have a really really loud and sometimes very abrasive TED talk. So I just over time learned to use my privilege in a different way,
Yeah,
to bring people further along, because it's not really the responsibility of people in those marginalized groups to do that. It's the responsibility of people with privilege. And
yeah.
so I just try and keep that in mind. And I'd really just urge anybody that when they kind of get that gut check, like, oh, that doesn't feel right, or ew, I don't like how that was said, to remember that when something is your lived experience, you're not focused on how someone else is receiving the message. You just want them to get it.
Mhm.
And I think
That's
that's a big
powerful.
part of it. So I think showing grace and focusing on the message rather than how the message was put out is the most important thing.
And I appreciate you sharing that. That's really powerful, and I think that's something that people need to hear. And you also said something else that we've mentioned in a couple other episodes, but is really important, I think, to keep bringing up. And that is, you can't expect the marginalized people to be the only one who stand up for
Yeah.
themselves.
Yeah.
Those of us with privilege, we have to stand up as well. It's kind of like you don't always go to this person and say, why do y'all do this? Why do y'all do that? It's like, no, we can speak up too.
Yeah.
It can't be relying on these people to do all that. We all have to raise our voice
Yeah.
and educate ourselves. And I think
Yeah.
that's the other important thing is educating yourselves over your own privileges and bias. And I know I've done that the last couple of years, and it's not comfortable, and it
Nope.
brings up things that you didn't even realize you were saying.
Yeah.
And that whole idea of microaggressions, I
Oh
think, is
yeah.
something I've really had to catch myself on a lot.
Yeah.
And when people call you out, it doesn't feel good. I don't care how much work you're doing on yourself. When somebody
Mm-hmm.
calls you out, you're like, but I'm doing, and it's like, I don't care what you're trying to do. Here's
Yeah.
what you're doing, and here's how it's hurting this person or these people or this group or this child. And so fix it.
Yeah. And I think that's an important point too, because a lot of people feel like you should do all of this in private,
Mhm.
that people should never call you out publicly. And I think, particularly for us, people that have any sort of platform at all, we really have to do our learning in public,
Right.
because if you harm on that level, you have to undo on that level,
Yes.
right? And I know this is something that's kind of like been a bone that people pick with me, is like, why didn't you just message me? Why did you say it in the comment section? Well, because for the 1,000 people that scroll by and see what you've said, for those 1,000 people not to see that that was wrong, or that that excluded someone or marginalized someone or was
Mhm.
harmful, for them not to see that, that's to affirm it, right?
Right.
And so I think as much as we can, doing our learning in the open is really critical. And that's definitely uncomfortable, and it's definitely messy. And I always try and make sure that it's clear that the learning is what I'm trying to get at,
Right.
because I think people again have that gut reaction of, no, this is my space, don't come tell me
Mhm.
what to do. um but the fact of the matter is, if we don't check each other,
Yeah.
then we're going to be in the same place we are right now. And we really do have to dismantle that together,
Right.
because we hold the power, in a lot of ways. If you are economically privileged, educationally privileged, linguistically privileged, able-bodied, white privilege, the whole nine,
Yeah.
when you have all that power, you need to use it for good rather than to uphold it. You know, it's it's not a loss of rights for us because this is not pie, right? Like if we don't
Uh-huh.
make sure someone else has a slice of the pie, that doesn't mean that we have any less. This is not how that works, right?
Yeah,
When everybody has more rights, we all do, right? We all
exactly.
benefit. So I think that's something people have to keep in mind, especially if they have a platform, that they
Yeah.
really have to be open to learning
Mhm.
in public. And that kind of goes for every teacher. You don't just have to be like on Instagram or social media or whatever, a teacher celebrity. That's not what you have to be in order to have a
Right.
platform. Your classroom is a platform.
Yep.
And so if you make a mistake in your classroom, or you have committed a microaggression against somebody, you need to own up to that
Yep.
in public for your students and model that, because we don't want to raise yet another generation that's incapable of unpacking that.
I love that. That's powerful. Well, Sarah, I want to switch gears here as we begin to wrap up. And I think we'd be remiss not to talk about the things
Yeah.
going on in our country right now with the school closures, the self isolation, the coronavirus, all of this stuff. Tell me a little bit about where your school and district currently sits, the decisions they're being made, and how you personally are working through the lack of goodbyes, the lack of
Yeah.
closure, the new frontiers. Like, talk to me a little bit about what's going on in your area.
So we actually did get to say goodbye on Friday. The decision came down at about like 1:30 on Friday that we would be out of school until April 14th for
Mhm.
students.
Right.
Teachers would report on April 13th. And initially, it was that teachers were going to have to come in on Monday, yesterday, and then do a virtual work day today. And that very quickly changed. On Saturday, it changed. We're not coming in. No one's going to be in any sort of building, the whole thing. So before we left, we were able to make sure every student that didn't have a device at home took home an Amazon Kindle. We made sure they had the information about free internet.
Mhm.
Our district arranged for feeding sites, so none of our students will go without food during this time. They actually, one of the things my district did that I was super, super proud of was they ensured that all substitutes and temporary employees would be paid.
Yes, I saw you shared that on
Um,
Instagram, and I
yeah,
absolutely was like blown away
yeah.
that that's a district that cares about their people.
Yeah. And so you have to think about it this way too, because every district has the capacity to do this. Because when you are an administrator, you have a budget for substitutes, or the county or district has a budget for substitutes. And if you're not at school, you're not using that money.
Mhm.
And when governors are waiving 180-day requirements, you're not going to have to make those days up. So whatever money you would expend on those days for substitutes, you have available to pay them. Same thing with TAs. You budget for those things far
Mhm.
ahead of time. So districts have this capability. And I think that for those of us that are guaranteed our full-time paycheck, we really have to push for districts to do that, and examine what money they're not going to be spending during this time, fuel costs for buses, energy costs for buildings, those kind of things, and reallocating them to paying staff, because it can be done. We just have to get creative with it.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that all of us can push our districts to do, or at least examine. For me, it didn't really hit me till today
Mhm.
of kind of what's going on, because we've had 3-day weekends here and there,
Mhm.
President's Day, MLK, but today it really did hit me because I was trying to do a read aloud for my students, and it just kind of made me realize that for the next month, that's the best contact I can hope for.
Mhm.
um, and I'm very, very close with all my students, as you might imagine, running the after school program. I get to know all of them. It's 180 kids that come in out of a school of about 550, 600. So I see a good chunk of the kids every single day for long after the school day ends. And for
Mhm.
me, it's been really hard not to see them. And then the self isolation, this weird sense that, if this was a snow day, I would be at home, but maybe if the conditions were good enough, I could go out, I could go to the
Mhm.
mall, I could go to the movies with my kids, etc. And now I'm like hand sanitizing like a maniac at Target, trying to get some bread. So, um, I think for a lot of us, it's obviously uncharted territory. And I think one of the things that I would say to teachers as a person that lives with a mental illness every day on a good day that's not in a pandemic, that you have to really make sure during this time that you are prioritizing your mental health as much
Yeah.
as you are trying to hand sanitize so you don't get this virus or pass it on. You have to be as vigilant with your mental health. And so making sure that you create opportunities for socialization. I know you saw that, like, I was trying to organize a virtual
Mhm.
game night on Facebook. Things like that that allow you to stay connected. Take
Yeah.
advantage of all of these musicians that are doing these at-home
Mhm.
concerts. Tomorrow, Debbie Allen is doing a dance class on
I
Instagram.
saw that.
Like, take advantage of these things to maintain some sense of interconnectedness, because I think that, this is like what, day 2, day 3, day 4 for some of
Mhm.
us. And um, this is going to be a very long haul. And I think it's
Yeah.
probably going to be a longer haul than April 14th for me out of school and for many. So I think guarding your mental health, staying connected with people, even virtually, use FaceTime, use Zoom, Skype, whatever you have to do, stay connected. And I think also um, manage your expectations
Mhm.
on what you're going to be able to do for learning during this time.
Yeah.
Um, I think that, providing our parents with options is really, really important. As a parent,
Mhm.
I appreciate that. Um, but as far as like a strict schedule, if it works for you and that's what keeps you
Yeah.
grounded, absolutely. If it stresses you out, don't do it. I think
Yeah.
you have to make day by day decisions and
Yes.
realize that none of us know how to do this because none of us have done this. Unless you were alive for the 1918 flu
Right.
epidemic, you know, you don't really have experience in this area. So I think we have to give ourselves a whole lot of grace. And like I said, just really prioritize our mental health, because isolation can be a huge trigger for a lot of people. And it can be something you don't even really notice.
Yeah. Well, and something that I think is really important that you kind of mentioned in a roundabout way was that, there's so many, if you get on Facebook today, there are so many educators sharing resources, learning opportunities, things. Those don't have to be just for the kids. Like
No,
as adults,
absolutely
we can
not.
take a virtual field trip. Like I did a robot activity with Cassie Stevens, the
Oh my
art
God, so
teacher.
did I.
And I was like, I don't have any kids at home, but I love Cassie Stevens. I want to do this. Like, you don't have to have a child or do it even with your kids. And it's great to do those kind of things with your kids. But, when we are
Yeah,
doing the self isolation, for those of us that are actually adhering to it, those are great
please adhere
things
to
to be
it.
able
Stay
to.
at home. Like, stay
Yes,
at
because
home.
oh, I can't even get off on
I
that
can't
tangent
either.
because I'll go off forever. But I think that's so important to remember because, like you said, your mental health can sneak up on you.
Yeah.
And we are extroverts, I know, are really struggling. And people have made these funny memes. Like I'm an introvert, and people have made these funny memes of like, oh, all the extroverts understand, and us introverts are just loving it so much. And I'm like, well, yes, I'm
No.
an introvert, but I'm not an introvert who loves to be stuck inside my house or where I can't go to the movies or to go shopping or to do these other things. Like
Yeah.
introvert doesn't mean I don't want to be around anybody for months on end. Like there's all kinds of different things. And so
Yeah.
I think the more, like you said, the more grace we can have with each other, and the more we
Yeah.
can take care of ourselves is incredibly important.
Yeah. And I think something that goes along with that is kind of creating new traditions or memories, which is why,
Mhm.
I'm organizing that like together at home game night and things like that, because, we have like this unique opportunity to find new ways to connect with each other without physically being together. And I think the more we can focus on that and obviously try and make the best of it, but
Mhm.
really focus on relationships and giving each other grace and
Yeah.
collaborating during this time, doing those things like the directed drawing with Cassie
Mhm.
Stevens or the dance class with Debbie Allen or chilling out to some Coldplay. The
Uh-huh.
more we can do those things and recognize the good in humanity right now, I
Yes.
think the better off all of us will be, because there's some really beautiful things that are going on in
Mhm.
spite of this. And I think the more we can look to that, create that, find ways within our own home, within our
Mhm.
own social group to do those things, the better off we'll be.
I totally agree. Well, Sarah, in closing today, the question I'd like to end with you on, and I try to end every episode with the same question, but I kind of want to shift this a little bit for this episode. And so my question I would say to you is, there are probably almost exclusively educators who listen to this, but there are some people who aren't in education who listen to these as well. But what is one thing that you would tell the educators in our world right now?
That anything that you're doing is enough. We all have to realize that whatever we do every day, whatever our best is in that moment, in that day, is enough, and it has to be enough right now. Right? Like, we can't have these expectations for ourselves because this is uncharted territory. And if getting out of the bed is the only thing you do tomorrow, that's enough.
Right.
Because there are going to be so many different feelings that we're feeling, and it's going to vary from day to day, moment to moment. And I also want to say it's okay to feel like this is fine. If you are in this headspace where you're not worried, this is okay, you're not struggling, don't feel like you should be either. Everyone's going to have a different reaction to this. Everyone's going to approach it differently. Give yourself grace and just know that whatever you're doing in this moment is enough, and hold tight to that.
I love that. Well, Sarah, I appreciate you so much. And when you agreed to come on, I was like, yes, because I love you and what you stand for and all the work you do.
I love you
Thank you for
too.
sharing some of your evening with me.
Yeah, no problem. I see someone shouted out PWCS in the house. Yes, hey. That's my
Yep. Well, thank you everybody for listening or watching another episode of Tell Your Story. Remember, you can check out past episodes on SoundCloud, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, it's there. Thank you so much for listening to Sarah's story, and I hope that her story has encouraged you to get out there and tell yours, because every story matters.